The theme that we chose, and even the speakers that we brought in, are really around this theme. Everyone say it with me. Say, winter is here. But most people still think it's fall, right? And so we're going to talk about practical ways to prepare. How many of you think and know real estate's not as easy today as it was even a year or two ago? Like, it's gotten more difficult. Interest rates have risen, right? We're in a different environment. So this is actually what I wanted to call it, but the team was like, I don't think we should call it protect your shit and prepare. But that's basically what I wanted the theme of this week to be about. How are we preparing? And guys, if you take nothing else away from today, my goal would be that you take away that this presentation and this event sparks a conversation in you of what am I doing to consistently improve, to get better, to protect, and to prepare for what might be coming. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay, one person, front row, let's go. So one of the things that I love, and just something I've been kind of tripping about recently, has been seasons. Everything has seasons to it, right? We have spring. What happens in spring, right? Traditionally, what would you do? You'd plant in the spring, right? And then summer would come. What do you do in the summer? Summer is when you kind of dominate, right? The sun is shining. We do that. And everything, this applies to everything in life, by the way. This applies to economies. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to do a little history lesson. This applies to your real estate career. This applies to you as a human being. And then after summer, what comes after summer, y'all? Fall comes after summer. Fall is when you reap if you've done good in spring and summer, right? And then what comes after every fall? And fall might be, like stock market at record highs, right? We are reaping the rewards of our spring and our summer. But what comes after every fall? Winter comes, right? And I believe we're in winter, but we're not exactly seeing it quite yet. But there's the cracks below the surface we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to talk about what can we do in our portfolios and our lives to prepare, right? So winter is here, and I don't think anybody's coming to save us. I think for you guys, and for all of us, it's something we have. I almost remember, you guys remember where you were when COVID first broke out? Like when you realized the whole U.S. was going to shut down? Who remembers where you were when that happens? I remember exactly where I was. I looked at my wife and I said, we're going to what I call the war room. And it became the war room, right? And did we really see a ton of negative effects from COVID, though? No, actually, most people got richer, right? They pumped out a bunch of money. Interest rates dropped to all-time lows. But I think we're going to see some of the effects. I actually think we're going into what I believe will be the most difficult season economically and what will be the most difficult season for real estate investors in the next 5 to 10 years. That's what I believe. And I'm preparing myself, and so I wanted to kind of just share some of the things I'm doing. But before we go down that route, I want to give a little history lesson. Anybody here love history? Okay, all right, good. Got a couple. So we're going to talk about history, and this is a guy I've studied. Does anybody know this guy, by the way? Ray Dalio is someone I've studied for the last 5 years, because when these things started to happen, specifically when Russia invaded Ukraine, I remember thinking, I've never been alive in a big war. I know Afghanistan happened, but I've never been alive when this has happened. And I'm curious, what's happening? And I want to understand what will happen. And you can do that by studying history, right? Because history repeats itself. Different names, different faces, different phases sometimes, but history repeats itself. How many of you would agree with that, by the way, that at some level there's a repeat to history? Just show of hands. Awesome. So Ray Dalio is the founder of Bridgewater Associates, one of the largest. For a while, it was the largest hedge fund in the world. So this guy's got to obviously study money and flows. Under management, 100 to 150 billion, 1,300 employees, best-selling author. But what I love about this guy, and what I love about him is he went back and he said, I want to know what's happening in the U.S. economy. And he said, I want to know what's happening. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back thousands of years, and I'm going to study the rise, the domination, and the fall of great economies. And I want to see if there's any patterns to history. Does this make sense? So he discovered something called the big cycle. Everyone say the big cycle. And it's really simple. There's a rise of every great economy. There's a domination of every great economy. There's a peak, and then there's a decline, and that's when the winter. And these things happen over here during the decline. You got a financial economic downturn. You have printing money and credit. We haven't done any of that recently, have we? We have revolutions and wars, we have debt restructuring, and then it comes to a new world order. But before you come to a new world order, you have a winter. You have a difficult season. And I want to make sure that we're all prepared for that difficult season. So he came up, so again, little history lesson. Just humor me for a moment to kind of go back in and share with you what Ray Dalio discovered. He said, okay, so he goes back thousands of years. He discovered all these major economies, and he goes, there are 5 commonalities. 5 major forces that decide whether an economy is rising or falling. Here's the 5 major forces: debt, internal conflict, external conflict, acts of nature, and then innovation and technology. We're going to talk about all those in a moment. That's great. The first one that scares me a lot about, frankly, and again, as I'm talking about the nation, I honestly kind of want you thinking about you as an individual too, because some of these principles can apply to you as an individual. But this is the biggest one that scares me about where we're at as a nation, and frankly, where we're at just as a country, even our individual debt levels. So Ray Dalio says, if you have too much debt, it leads to a financial heart attack. Right? And why is that? One of the biggest reasons is because eventually you have more and more of your money going towards what? Interest payments. And so if you have a lot of money going towards interest, what can you not spend money on? Innovation, technology, doing cool stuff, right? Expanding, right? And so this is a crazy stat. All major empires from the past have dealt with their debt problem the exact same way. What do you think that is? Every single time back to the Roman Empire, they started mixing their silver coins with a little bit of base metals, right? Every single major economy has done that in the same way. Have we done that in U.S., yes or no? Yeah, I took Ramu. Ramu and I were in Asheville the other day. I took him out. We bought a cheeseburger. Well, we both bought cheeseburgers, and it was $50. We didn't even get drinks. We got water and lemons. And I was just thinking, I remember, I'm not that old, but I remember when this would have been $10, $15. So it's okay, maybe inflation's 3%, but our cheeseburgers tell a different story, okay? So I'm just saying. So here's a key metric. So Ray Dalio, he went back, he studied, and he said, there's one key metric that I'm worried about. He goes, if the total debt to GDP ratio, now total debt includes government debt, corporate debt, and household debt, not just federal government debt. And he said, if the total debt of a country is over 250 to 300% of GDP, then history says in almost every case, he went back thousands of years, that's when it becomes unsustainable, right? Where do you think we're at right now in the US? What is our total debt to GDP? 350%. Insane, right? And that includes the debt we hold, right? It includes that debt as well. And that's the level at which it just starts eating too much of national income, growth slows, policies resort to money creation. So that's where we're at, right? Number 2, internal conflict. How many of you would say that in America right now we've got some pretty big internal stresses? Right, I got to see 2 hands over here, 1 here. Yeah, we do. It's insane, right? And we not just have social stress, but we have a ton of inequality. Inequality is really, and honestly, it's to some extent, it's why we're in CoLiving. Right? We support. I feel like, honestly, I think we're helping with the inequality and in some way bringing people back. One of the things I'd love for all of you to be brainstorming, someone asked me this. I was applying for a TED Talk the other day, and they were like, hey, how are you going to, they said, Sam, we get that you're helping solve affordable housing, but how are you going to help those people live in the homes one day, own something? Because they may never own something, an asset in their life. And I said, man, I haven't cracked that code yet. But it'd be so cool if we could get people to some sort of fractional ownership that live in the home. Wouldn't that be awesome? Because that would be really helping people actually own something. But we have this huge gap, right? The middle class starts disappearing, right? So you get the top 10% of Americans hold 70% of the US wealth. Well, the bottom 50% hold only about 2.5%. That's disparity. That's where this wealth gap grows. And what happens when there's a big wealth gap? What do you think? Okay, but internal stress, he said revolution. But a lot of times it has led to revolution if you study history, actually. If you go back, right? The right, the left, the have-nots, right? It creates a lot of tension, and we're seeing some of that now. I thought this was interesting. There's 40,000 protests took place in the U.S. between 2017 and 2020. That's more than any other 5-year period in U.S. history. So either we're getting just more outspoken, or there's more internal conflicts. Okay, the third force that drives economies into a new world order and a winter is an external conflict. Do we have an external conflict right now, yes or no? A big one. They wouldn't talk about it a ton, but if you really pull back and study, you realize that China makes 30% of all manufactured goods in the world. That's more than US, Germany, and Japan combined. China refines about this one's been in the news recently, right? China's like, hey, we'd like to control all the rare earth metals, but you need rare earth metals for everything from electric cars to fighter jets to smartphones, right? And that's starting to become weaponized. So you have this external conflict. And by the way, if 2 or 3 of these forces are at play, it doesn't necessarily mean, usually economies can kind of navigate around those. But if all 5 of them at play, it usually means you're either in winter, headed towards winter, or going there really fast. Does that make sense? So we have number 3. Number 4 is acts of nature. We've had a few acts of nature the last few years, right? A few, right? And these don't necessarily, when you go back and you study history, you realize that economies that go into winter have acts of nature just add pressure to the cycle. They like accelerate it. So obviously we had a huge pandemic. I thought this was an interesting stat. The US had 28 separate billion-dollar weather disasters in 2023, the most ever recorded in 1 year. Does anybody have home insurance gone up at all? A few of you have had home insurance go up. Trevor, hopefully tonight, is going to talk about a new CoLiving insurance product. Hopefully we'll weave that in. I'm throwing that in there because I know I've gotten questions about that already today. But you have acts of nature. All right, and number next is technology. When you have innovation and competition with innovation, it creates even more tension and can accelerate a winter. So the US leads with about 700 unicorns. A unicorn is a billion-dollar startup. China only had a handful a decade ago. It now has 300. Right? It's growing super fast. China files 1.6 million patents per year. It's more than the US, Japan, and Germany combined, right? So here's kind of the summary of what I'm saying. I promise I'll make this practical. I just wanted to take you back. We're going to do a couple quick little historical lessons. So historically, major powers at their peak, they have strong education, strong innovation, strong productivity over many decades. In the decline, we have rising debt, weaker productivity, and we have internal stability. So what's the reserve currency of America right now? That's the stupid question. What's the reserve currency of the world right now? US dollar. What was it before US dollar?
British pound.
British. And what was it before the British pound? Dutch. It was the Dutch, right? So the Dutch Republic had the world's reserve currency. Same thing. They had all those forces. They had this rise. They led in shipping. The Dutch actually made ships better than anyone in the world. And it was their navy that allowed them to kind of conquer the world and project power all over the world. Their 5 forces, same thing, massive government debt. They had to finance all their wars that they were having. Internal conflict. They had a huge concentration of wealth in the elites. External rivalry. All of a sudden, England started stealing their top talent, and they built ships faster and better than they did. Disruptive shock. They had the wars, colonies drained the resources, and their productivity dropped, right? That's Dutch. British Empire came after them. They were the reserve currency of the world. Through the Industrial Revolution, they blew up. They had global trade. They stole the ships. They stole the technology of the ships from the Dutch, and now they were making them better and cheaper. And again, same kind of thing, right? This was in the 1800s and mid-1900s. You had debt. You had massive borrowing during the world wars. By 1945, their debt was greater than 250% of gross domestic product, GDP. They had huge internal conflict. You had rising class tensions. Kind of sound like something that's happening today. External rivalry. U.S. started to step in, right? Other industrial powers kind of surpassed them. You had and then you had disruptive shocks or like other events, like 2 big world wars. You had the Great Depression, decolonization, right? Slower growth, aging industries. Okay, so you have the United States. We have where we're at, and this is not so much me saying, yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment. This is not me taking a crap on the United States. This is me just helping us understand where we're at and then what we can do to prepare. Does that make sense? Right? And so I'm just coming at this from I'm trying to come at this from a non-political view, just like, hey, this is what's happening if you actually go back and study history. So you have the empire's rise. After World War II, America was the dominant superpower, for sure. It's like we had loaned everybody money, right? We had a ton of innovation, and that was when the US dollar became the reserve currency of the world. Current decline signs, though. We have all 5 forces here. We've got national debt exceeds 350% of GDP. We've got internal conflicts. We already talked about external conflicts. China rising as a major power. Disruptive shocks. We've had pandemic, global supply chain shifts, trade wars, et cetera, and productivity and innovation. Thankfully, because people like us and people like you guys in the room, we work hard, we're productive, but it is slowing, especially as a lot of our money goes to pay towards interest and things like that. You get your Dutch, you have your British, and you have this transition. And so when this transition happens is winter, right? That's where it gets hard. That's where interest rates rise. And the reason I'm sharing this, you might say, well, Sam, this is all pretty pessimistic. But I read a book. How many of you have ever heard of a book called Man's Search for Meaning? Anybody ever heard of that book? Amazing book. It's about a guy, Viktor Frankl, who lived in a Nazi concentration camp. And in there, he says, I'm going to kind of tell this little story. He said, I realized, how many of you, first let me ask this, how many of you would consider yourself a pessimist, like slightly pessimistic? A couple of you. How many of you consider yourself an optimist? Okay, so he basically was in this Nazi concentration camp, and he said, I watched my friends, and they would say things like, man, the Allies, they're going to come, they're going to rescue us, they'll be here by Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving would come, and Thanksgiving would go. And they'd be like, well, fine, the Allies will rescue us by Christmas, for sure. They're going to rescue us by Christmas. Christmas would come, Christmas would go. Allies didn't rescue them. They're still in the concentration camp. Oh, by Easter, they'll come, they'll go. And Viktor Frankl said, those people, he said, they just were too optimistic. He's like, they just died from a broken heart. Oh, it's going to come. No, it's going to come. Oh, it's going to come. It's not going to come. And it was the first time in my life when I was reading this book, I said, man, there's some value in being a little bit pessimistic. I'd love for you to jot this down if you're a note taker. This is a quote from Ray Dalio. He says, if you worry, you don't have to worry. If you don't worry, you should worry. I'll say that again because it's actually been kind of what's informed this presentation. It's informed a little bit of how I'm thinking about the next 5 to 10 years of my real estate portfolio and how I'm attacking this, how I want you guys to attack this. So again, he says, if you don't worry, you should worry. If you worry, you don't have to worry. He said, if you worry, you do the things that keep that thing that you're worrying about from happen. But how many of you have ever not worried about something and that's the area of life or business you get hit in the most? You're like, holy, I wasn't worried about that. And that's the idea here. So I wanted to share that little story with you because I do think there's some value in being pessimistic, right? I would even call, when I asked who was a pessimist, Matt Osmond raised his hand. And it's kind of true because him and I get on these deals and I'm like, man, why are you adding in these fees and putting this vacancy rate in? You're making this deal look worse than it needs to be. He's like, no, Sam, this is probably what the deal is going to actually do. He's being a little bit pessimistic. Does that make sense? There's some value in being pessimistic, okay? So I wrote this down. It says, the pessimists with purpose, if you prepare and you persevere through the winters, you will win. Okay, so when winter comes, and I'm using winter as an analogy for life, I'm using winter as an analogy for this season of the economy, and the reason I share this too is, I gotta be honest, I'm a little tired of like, I'll go into these groups or whatever, and they'll just be like, oh no, it's gonna get better, like next month interest rates are gonna drop 1.5 points or whatever, you know, it's like we have these rose-colored glasses, and I'd rather us just prepare for the long term, and if it gets better, great. But it might not get better. It might get worse. Does that make sense? I think that's what we need to prepare for. So a couple of things I want you to think about. If you jot these down. And again, this is kind of the theme of today. Today's about protection. Today's about making sure you're set up for no matter what happens, you can thrive. When winter comes, many people starve, right? But if you're prepared, you thrive. And so here's some things I'm doing to thrive. The first thing that I want to encourage all of you to do is to find a new way to give your skills to the world. Right? For us, I wanted to give this example of like the inner circle. When we launched this program, we didn't have an inner circle program, right? But our team is constantly asking, how can we give more value to the world? How can we do a done-for-you service for people? How can we bring in affiliates where you guys get to build these relationships? And so for us, I'm constantly thinking, okay, how can I become a more valuable person? No matter what happens in the economy, what are you doing in your life right now to become more valuable so you have more to give to the marketplace? Right? That could be coming to an event like this, showing up, learning. Kurt's working on some international investments where he's getting people to, shameless plug for Kurt's, raising capital for Airbnbs all over the world where people can travel. I don't even know the full thing. You could probably give the whole pitch. But he's finding a way to add more value to people and raising capital for that. And that's really cool. We need to be thinking about how we can upskill, how we can find a way to give our skills to the world. Number 2, and I don't know what it is, guys. I'm technically a millennial. I don't know what it is about the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation. It's so interesting. A lot of my generation has kind of given up on this idea of creating income. And I know I'm part of promoting this, but kind of the mindset of the millennials and definitely my brothers and sisters who are Gen Z is like, no, I'm gonna make as little money as possible and I'm just gonna travel the world, which is fine, right? But that's kind of a common thing and I'm okay with that, but I really believe that everybody should build a second engine, which is kind of the same question as the first one. How can I contribute more? I was running a martial arts school, this was a decade and a half ago, and I built another martial arts school and ended up being 8 martial arts schools. And through that, I had a mentor pull me aside and say, Sam, your company is doing well right now, but it might not always do well. I need you to skim some off the top, and I need you to prepare for a winter. Now, I didn't use those exact words, but that's kind of what I heard. And so I said, okay, sure. So I started skimming some off the top. Even when it was difficult, even when I had bad months, I would skim some off the top, some money, I'd put it in a little savings account, and then I would buy my first CoLiving, my second CoLiving, my third CoLiving, right? And I'm so glad I did that because and I'll tell a little bit more about the story in a moment, but I'm so glad I did that because without that second engine, when my martial arts schools, when my CEO went to jail of that company, of that entire company, when COVID hit and we were shut down for 8 months, right? I had a second engine. I had something I was building on the side that produced income and that I was able to flow into, and it was real estate and coaching and doing what we're doing now. Does that make sense? I think that's incredibly important and something you all should be thinking about. Decrease expenses. Does anybody here make a game out of like decreasing expenses or negotiating? My wife does this tremendously. A few of you. I want you to make more of that a game. You know, Benjamin Franklin had this great quote. I love it. He said that $1 saved is, we all know it, right? We maybe don't even know it was him, but $1 saved is $1 earned. So there's two ways to make money. Make money or save on expenses, right? Decrease expenses. And that's something I'm looking at in my own life, right? Sell off non-performing assets. I think you should only be invested, and that's what we brought in some people today to talk about, is you should only be investing in things that are needs and not wants, right? I'm selling off all my short-term rentals right now, with the exception of 2 legacy properties, one in Charlotte, one in Asheville, that we're going to keep. But all of those are going, because I don't want to be in that business during a winter, right? Now, I'm not saying that there won't be some that do well, but does anybody here own short-term rentals or have some friends that, yeah. It's just something I'm saying, hey, I want to be able to get out of that. There is a dip in interest rates right now, but I personally don't believe they're going to drop. I don't personally they're going to continue to drop for us in the 30 years. That's just my personal opinion. We have a dip right now, so if anybody had an interest rate that's in the 8s, I have 1 or 2 in the 9s because I just kept buying. I think now's a great time to refinance high interest rate debt. Talked about that. Strengthen your survival fund. Remember when it was 3 months? So that was the traditional advice, was have 3 months of your survival fund. I think it should be 6 to 12 months. I think you should stock up on cash. I think for me, I'm refinancing loans to a higher interest rate, even on a higher interest rate, if I can get cash out, right? I think Apple was the one that did this famously before the crash, right? I think it was the 2008 crash. They just went out. Rama, was that correct? You were the one telling me about this. Ford did it. Oh, Ford. Okay, yeah. Ford went in and they kind of saw what was coming. They went out, they took a ton of loans out, and they were stocked and they were ready. They didn't even need the money at the time, right? But they were prepared. Get mentally tough. What I want to encourage you guys to do today as we dive into this, and I'm almost done here, is get mentally tough. You surround yourself with people who challenge you. I got challenged the other day. I realized I even do this. Like, I'll go into groups that I'm excited to be a part of. Like, I'm a part of several mastermind groups, and I'll go in, and I always find I'll inflate stuff a little bit. I'll be like, sometimes I'll realize I make things sound and I realize we all kind of do that sometimes if we want to impress, right? And so I'm really going to encourage you guys, especially today, just tell people like it really is, right? Because then you'll get real feedback. It doesn't have to sound better than it is. Does that make sense, guys? That's kind of what I want you. I think get mentally tough, surround yourself with people who challenge you. Those people are in the room. You will have some networking opportunities today. And then just ask for honest feedback. Tell people what's really going on in your life. Tell people what's really going on in your finances, right? Hey, I'm struggling. I'm going through this situation. I need some help. How do I get out of this? And I need to get scrappy to get out of this. That's key. And then focus on hard assets. Who here knows Robert Kiyosaki? Now, Robert Kiyosaki is very doomsdayish and has, how many of you know his 5 Gs? He said you should only be investing in 5 Gs. Here's what they are: gold, guns, grub, ground, gas. But I do like this. One of my buddies pulled me aside. He's a big macroeconomic economic guy, and he was like, Sam, he's like, it doesn't matter how high tech the world gets. He goes, most wars are fought over low tech shit. And I was like, kind of went back. I thought about that. I thought about what's happening with rare earth metals and this and energy and all that's happening. I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? So basically, Robert Kiyosaki is like, invest in the low tech stuff, right? And I like that. And I've always been ever since my parents went all in on Y2K, I've been a big gold bug, and gold's at record highs, silver's at record highs. I put 10% of my assets in gold, in silver. I think that's wise. I think that's smart. It's a nice hedge, especially when central banks around the world are buying. And then, of course, I guess you guys couldn't imagine what number 10 would be. I threw this in here, big surprise. I think you go all in on CoLiving, but I think you go all in on it with 30-year debt. Not adjustable rate mortgages. I have a few mortgages that I took out that were 10-year fixed, 5-year fixed from some commercial lenders. But the reason I like 30-year debt is because if interest rates go up, you're locked in and you're good. If interest rates go down, you refinance, you're good. You win either way. Does that make sense? And what happens is if you take out a 30-year mortgage and they inflate the currency, you're paying back a mortgage with dollars that are worth less. So that's a good thing for you. Does that make sense? So I think there's some value if you can get 30-year debt. And we can on co-living homes. It's one of the reasons I'm all in on it. You can't do that in a lot of other asset classes, but you can on co-living homes, okay? I've got 100 things. I was just kind of going through this. ChatGPT was helping me create, and I kind of went through this. And I think there's like 10, what I'd love for you to do is look over this list. In a moment, I'll give you an exercise and just have you look over. And I want you to kind of choose a few things, or at least share with your partner, what are the things you are doing to prepare? How are you prepared for, quote unquote, winter? If it comes. And there's a ton of things, right? It could be everything from making yourself tougher, being valuable. I had a friend who I bike with all the time, and he's like an insane biker. He bikes 100 miles. He'll get up in the morning, bike 80 miles. And one day I was out for a bike ride with him, and I said, hey, what are you training for? And he was like, oh, I'm not training for anything. I said, really? Like, you're going hard. I'm a good biker, but I couldn't keep up with him at all. And he was like, no, man, I'm training for life. And he just said that, and I thought, that's so cool. I wish you guys had that. I wish more people had that mentality of like, no, I'm just here to get tough for life. I'm here to get tough for whatever may happen. I'm here to get tough for my family, right? And I don't think that winter was meant to destroy us. I think winter was meant to make us tougher and harder and more and just be more prepared. When I went through, I was telling you guys about my martial arts company. You know, the CEO that went to jail was actually my brother. And you know, when COVID hit, they came in and said, "Hey, you can't have a martial arts school. You got to be completely online." Satish knows, right? For this time period. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, right? What is going to happen? What's going to happen to my business?" And that felt like a winter for me, right? And I had to create the war room and go in and say, "How am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to feed? How am I going to do all of this?" Right? And some of those actions that I took were on that list right there. And so what I'd love for you to do, and by the way, what comes after winter? Spring. It always follows winter, which is really powerful. So my point in this presentation is to be a little bit pessimistic. I see a lot of optimism still going around. And I think it was Justin and I, we went to Bigger Pockets, the Bigger Pockets conference. And it was the first time at a big real estate conference I've ever had someone say, hey, it's going to get tough. And at Bigger Pockets, they were starting to say, it's going to get tough. This is not the season, and we don't think it's going to get good really soon. So you guys got to prepare. And I said, man, I've been thinking that and feeling that and making actions on that for a while. And I think we need to prepare the people around us. So here's what I'd love for you to do. I'd love for you to take a look at the sheet. I'd love for you to turn to someone you didn't talk to earlier. I'd love for you to just share, if any of this resonated with you, what piece of this resonated with you? Do you feel the same way? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And if so, what would be like 3 action items you kind of maybe already know you need to do? Right? Some of you are in a place where you're like, look, I know I need to upskill. I need to find a way to add more value to the world. I need to find that place. That's my next thing. Or maybe it's, hey, I've got a couple of homes with a ton of equity. I need to refinance those. I want to put those on 30-year debt, and I'm going to take that cash out, and I'm going to stock that. I'm going to be prepared for that, even though maybe I don't need it right now. Maybe that's it for you, right? If for you, it could be the action item could just be like, I'm closing on my first co-living home. I'm getting that thing locked in on 30-year debt, and we're rocking. We're getting some cash flow that way. That's an okay action item too. But I want you to come up with at least 3 ways that you can prepare for winter and just make sure that you're strong. Does that make sense? Awesome.